Hi everyone. In this video, I'd like to show you how to present the results in a structured question modeling paper. If you have not subscribed to my channel, please subscribe for more videos about the structured question modeling or SEM method and how to run the analysis using AMOS. As mentioned in another video, I usually receive questions about how you can cite references for using the guidelines in my videos. So I provide you with two of my publications using the same approach and process explaining in this video and other SEM videos. Feel free to cite both of them if you use any of my guidelines in your paper or research project. Structured question modeling is a popular method in many areas, including management, marketing, safety management, and social behaviors. Hence, the process is rather straightforward, and there are some standardized ways to present the results in our papers. However, you might notice that many published articles present the SEM results in different ways, which could cause some confusion. In this video, I will show you the way I usually use in my papers. I have been using this approach successfully in many of my publications. Note that for articles in journals, we do not usually have a lot of spaces to provide many details as in a dissertation. Most journals set certain word and page limitations for the manuscripts, so we have to find a way to consolidate the results and present them in a more efficient way using fewer tables and figures as possible. To give you a holistic view of the research, I will go over all parts of the paper, but will focus more on the methodology and the results sections. As with any research papers, the introduction section should start by providing the audience some brief introductions of the topic so they understand more about what we're doing. Then we provide some brief summary of the current literature review and the shortcomings. That would help develop the problem statement in this paper. Based on that, we can present the research questions. As explained in other videos, structured question modeling or SEM is a theory-driven method. In addition, we might have a lot of hypotheses in our research model. Therefore, for this type of research, we should avoid presenting one research question for each hypothesis, because we might end up with 10 to 30 research questions, which does not look good for a research paper. I usually use more general research questions such as what are the factors that influence passenger behavioral intention? And add another research question, what are the extents of those effects? For research papers, we usually do not present hypotheses in the introduction section, as they can take a whole page. After research questions, we'll describe the purpose of study, why the topic is important, and some delimitations for our study. Literature review is an important section of this paper. Remember that it is a theory-driven research, so we have to conduct a good review of the current literature to show the research gaps. We also need to present the theoretical foundations that we use to develop our research model. Any theories that we use should be included in these sections. In addition, the construct derived from the literature should be presented here as well. For example, in this paper, I use the theory of planned behavior, or TPB. So I present that theory along with factors that appear in my model. These factors include TPB factors and some external factors. To present the research framework, I usually put it in a separate section. My suggestion is to present the framework using a diagram and explain in the text the proposed relationships. The explanation should be clear enough to help the audience understand exogenous and endogenous variables in the model. I usually present the literature support for all hypotheses. For related hypotheses, I put them in the same group to avoid repetitive statements. For example, I put all hypotheses based on the original TPP model together. Since an SEM model is constructed from the theory, the literature support for the framework and hypothesis is very important. Methodology section is another section that we need to pay more attention to. For an SEM paper, most researchers use the survey method, so there is a lot of content details to be included. However, for papers like this, we should try to keep the section brief. Otherwise, we may end up with many pages of methodology. I usually start by describing the survey method, population and sample, questionnaires, and the survey process. If a pilot study was done, it should be mentioned as well. For the large scale survey, it is important to identify the target population, sampling frame, sampling strategy, and the minimum sample size needed. For the questionnaire, we should include all components, including the invitation, demographic questions, constructs, and the number of items for each construct. Depending on the length of your questionnaire, you can decide to include it in the main document or the appendix. My suggestion is to only provide the question items and corresponding constructs as presented in Table 3 and avoid showing the actual survey, which is very long. It's also important to mention the scales of the question items and why we chose those scales. Then I describe in detail how the data was collected and an effort that were made to minimize the sampling bias. The response rate and actual sample size should be mentioned along with a statement on whether it is sufficient for the study. The next part of the methodology section is analysis process. I usually describe briefly how to prepare the data, confirmatory factor analysis, or CFA process, and the full SEM process. It's important to explain the goodness of fit indexes that we use to evaluate the model fit. The process of evaluating construct reliability and validity is also needed. My recommendation is to clearly explain the method you use to evaluate the construct reliability, conversion validity, and discriminant validity. As you can see, there's many details in the SEM methodology that we may want to include. However, for an article, we have to keep them brief and at the same time provide enough information. Now let's move to the results section. This is another challenging section because we want to include many inputs in the SEM process. So we need to find an efficient way to combine the outputs in a fewer tables and figures as possible. As always, I suggest starting with providing some demographic informations. The best way to do so is to present the demographic profile using bar charts or pie charts, as they are easier to see and understand. If there are many demographic variables, we include them in a table. The purpose of this section is to provide the audience with demographic information of the participants to help us justify the generalizability of the study. You also want to describe briefly assumption testing results. Normality is an important assumption, and we need to make sure we meet this assumption, as explained in the other videos. If you have to do any data transformation, you should mention it here, but you do not have to provide detailed outputs. What's more important is whether we have resolved the problem. We also need to mention how we handle missing values and outliers. Usually this part is rather brief. Note that reviewers are very familiar with the method and require assumptions. So we do not need to provide a lecture for that topic in our paper. Then we move to an important part, CFA output, reliability and validity assessment. Usually in a dissertation, students spend many pages using many tables to present all of these results. In my paper, I combined all of those outputs in one big table, as you can see in Table 4. In this table, I put all the factors and the items. Note that I only include the final factors and final question items, not the initial ones. It is not necessary to put interim results at each step of the post hoc analysis. But you do not but you do need to explain what items are removed and why. The goodness of fit indexes for the CFA are presented at the bottom of the table. For each item, I put the standardized factor loadings from the CFA output. You could also add the mean and standard deviation values if needed. For each factor, I include the Cronbach's alpha value, the composite reliability score or CR, and average variance extracted or AVA. These values show the construct reliability assessment, the conversion validity assessment. As for discriminant validity, you could use two different ways to present the results. As mentioned in the other videos, we use Fortnell and Lacker's method to evaluate discriminant validity by comparing the AVE for a factor with the maximum values of the square correlations. I used to use a separate table to present these results, as shown in the table on the right. This table presents the square root of AVE values on the diagonal and the correlations in the rest of the table for comparison. But I find a better way to include that result in the same big table 4 that I have here. The maximum values of the square correlations is called maximum shared variance or MSV. By comparing all square correlations between one factors and other factors in the model, we will find the MSV for that factor. So I include the MSV values in the same table. To evaluate the discriminant validity, I just need to look at this table and compare the AVE value for each factor with the corresponding MSV value. As you can see, I can save a table with this approach, and it is easier to explain the outcome. Once we confirm the factor structure and the construct reliability and validity, we can move to test the full structural model. For this part, I include the goodness of fit indexes to confirm the model fit. You could present the relationships in a diagram. The diagram should show what hypothesis is supported, standardized regression weights, t-values, and p-values. I actually do not use the full diagram from Amos because it's very big and crowded, so it is very hard to see the details. You could just draw a diagram with the factors only. In these papers, I use a table to present the results to avoid repeating the diagrams. As presented in Table 5, I show the proposed hypothesis and relationships with factor names, the standardized regression weights, t-values, p-values, and whether a hypothesis is supported or not. The purpose of using standardized regression weights is to allow us to compare the effect size between relationships. Finally, we have the discussions and conclusions section. For discussions, I discuss the findings related to each hypothesis. What we need to focus here is whether the findings are consistent with the current literature. If not, is that the new discovery or is it a limitation of the study? From that perspective, even the non-supported hypothesis still has value. The reviewers always want to know if we find something new and anything that could contribute to the body of knowledge. In the conclusion sessions, I usually discuss the theoretical contributions and practical contributions of the paper. I also add recommendations for the organizations or authorities here. And I finish the section with some recommendations for future research. Those are some guidelines on how to present the process and the results for SEM research. SEM is a straightforward process, so it is not hard to find some good examples of SEM papers in the literature. However, you may notice the differences in the way the researchers present the results across articles. Therefore, I would like to show this video my approach to organize and present the SEM process and analysis results. I think it is an efficient way to present information coherently and adequately and still can stay within the page limit set by the publisher. You can use these two references to refer to the guideline I share in these videos and other SEM videos. Please subscribe to my channel if you have not subscribed. Thank you and bye now.